Hello, so here we're going to be focusing on how to stitch the back stitch, and whereas with the running stitch you go up and down continuously moving in one direction, with the back stitch it's a bit different in that we stitch forward and then we go back on ourselves, and then we stitch forward and we go back on ourselves, and I'll explain that to you now. So just because you might be new to sewing, we're going to start by drawing a line on our fabric, which will just help us sew in a nice straight line while we learn. So I'm just using a pencil here. It's quite a light line. So we've got our threaded needle here, and there's a knot in the end of our thread. And that's all you need to get going. Okay, so we're going to start our back stitch now. So we've got our needle and thread, and we're going to start by pushing our needle through the fabric from the underside of the fabric, from the bottom of the fabric, and you just pull your thread gently through until you feel your knot tugging on the bottom of the fabric. So that will be against the bottom like that, and then you want to create your stitch so it can be any length that you like. I'm going to push back down through the fabric a bit further along, and then gently pull it through, and that's created our first stitch. And underneath you can see there's a gap, so there's our knot, and that's where our thread has come out. So we're going to bring our needle up again and leave a space after the last stitch. And we're going to pull our thread through gently until we feel that tug. And that will have created a stitch on the underside. Now, whereas with running stitch you just keep moving in one direction, with back stitch we're going to stitch back to the end of our first stitch that we made. So now we've come out of our fabric, we're going to go back on ourselves and put the needle back through at the end of our first stitch. And then we're going to pull that through again gently until you feel that little tug that you're at the end of the thread. And then we're going to bring our needle back through the fabric a bit further along in the direction that we're sewing, so that there's a gap after the last stitch. And we're just pulling our thread through, and you feel that tug. And then once again we're going back to the last stitch that we just did, and we're going to push our needle down there. So you can see with this stitch we're creating a continuous line of stitching. This is quite a strong stitch. So I'm coming up after leaving a space, pulling my thread through, and then stitching back down at the last stitch. And I'll just do a few more stitches so you can watch, coming up through the fabric from the bottom and then stitching down at the end of the previous stitch. So we're always doing one stitch forward and one stitch backwards. Up through the fabric and down on our last stitch. Okay, So up through the fabric and then back to your last stitch to push down to the underside. And this stitch looks quite similar on the front and on the back of your fabric. So it's just a continuous line of stitching. And then when you finish doing your back stitch, we just finish to secure it like we did with the running stitch. So we push our needle up through the stitch on the underside and pull it through so that we've created this loop of thread, and then we just thread our needle back through that loop and pull it tight, and we can just do that again. So we push our needle through the stitch and pull the thread to create a loop, and we bring our needle through that loop and we pull it gently until that knot is formed, and then we can just cut our thread because it's secured. So this is how we sew the back stitch. Okay, so I thought I'd just show you some examples of how I've used back stitch myself. It's another stitch that's really good for mending and for making visual mends on your clothes, so things that look really fun. This is me practicing some different ways of using back stitch here. So I've back stitched rows of thread here, and I've stitched it in a circle here, and again in a straight line here. But in each of these techniques I've then got a different coloured thread and used my needle to go in and out of the stitches to create a more decorative back stitch look. And that would be really fun to do if you were sewing up a hole in some clothes, layering some fabric over a hole. This was me playing around. I almost used back stitch to draw, so I was going to make some brooches with this design, which I did in the end. This one was too big, and this is a stitched back stitch self-portrait, and this was my flag that I made for Huddersfield Town Football Club. And I used back stitch to sew the dog that you can see, the terrier. And then it's this last one. This is the front of the train station building, and I've used back stitch to sew this. And then I've also used back stitch just to create some detail at the top, some triangle pattern. So there's lots of different ways you can use back stitch. It's quite an artistic stitch, even though it's quite a simple stitch to sew. And yeah, it's really good for layering fabric, so really great if you're repairing clothes and you want to make something look quite fun. So I hope that's given you some inspiration, and we'd love to see how you use the back stitch if you want to tag us in any photos on social media.